a majority of voters now think he should resign. Somewhere around 1 in 3 of those who even voted Conservative at the last general election think that it's now time for the Prime Minister to resign. So, when it comes to Boris Johnson, he needs to maybe forget about a third term and convince the public that he's delivering and should stay in the job right now.
It's interesting, though, we're going to hear from 3 GB viewers and listeners today, none of whom will think like that. They are big Boris supporters. Are they a rarity?
Well, they're certainly a minority now. And that's different from what we were seeing before. In the 2019 general election, Boris Johnson won a landslide election victory. He managed to achieve what Theresa May completely failed to achieve, and convinced voters, convinced those who voted Leave in the referendum, that he alone could get Brexit done. And that's why he was given such a large majority in Parliament. But since then, it is fair to say that views of him have changed quite dramatically. Firstly, over Partygate, but also as the cost of living crisis goes on, there is a view that his government isn't responding well enough to that crisis. And that's meant that the sort of median voter in this country no longer thinks that he's the kind of strong, competent leader who can deliver on those kind of things that he promised in that general election.
It does feel like Groundhog Day, doesn't it, though, when you hear backbenchers and, indeed, you've got, Oliver Letwin on Friday quitting as well from the Cabinet over these renewed calls for him to go for another vote of confidence. I mean, is that likely to happen? How vulnerable is his position? Because, of course, 40% of his own MPs wanted him out, but he won his confidence vote. He should be safe for a year, and yet here we are with more letters being submitted.
Yeah, no, it does feel like Groundhog Day, and, we've been having this conversation for quite a while now. Look, I mean, but there's, can the Prime Minister come back from this? His popularity has waned quite dramatically in recent months. It's certainly possible for him to come back to this and to regain that stature among the public. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. If you're asking me my personal opinion, I think it's unlikely he's going to end up coming back from that situation because, on top of his current unpopularity, he faces a cost of living crisis, he faces a potential recession, NHS, problems like that. He's going to find it very hard to turn it around. But yes, you're right. What does the Conservative Party do in that situation? Are they going to get rid of him, or are we going to keep having this conversation on repeat for months and months and months?
Well, except he's on the world stage for the next couple of days at this G7 summit. That's bound to do him good.
Yeah, I think that's true. When you look at the wide range of issues we ask about, do you think Boris Johnson is doing well or badly on all of these issues? On most of those questions, people say badly now, but there's a few exceptions to that. One of which is defence and national security, and the other one of which is a lot of these foreign affairs issues. The response to Ukraine, for example, one of the things he'll be talking about at the summit today. That's an area where voters think that he's doing particularly well.
OK, Chris Curtis, really interesting to get your thoughts, as always. Thank you very much from Opinion. Thank you. We'll talk now to Sam Lister, who joins us from the G7 summit in Bavaria. Very good morning to you, Sam. A busy day ahead then for the G7 leaders. The Prime Minister speaking, but they'll also be tuning in to speak to President Zelensky of Ukraine as well.
Yes, President Zelensky will give an address this morning. We're not sure if we're going to actually see the footage ourselves, but he will certainly be addressing those leaders. And this summit is all about Ukraine, really. Obviously, there are other issues being discussed, including climate change today, but really the focus is on Ukraine and how the international community can continue to keep up momentum.
OK, and so just give a flavour of what's happened so far at the G7. Yesterday, there was this bilateral meeting between President Macron...
Very bad line.
...and Boris Johnson. Yeah, it's a bad line, don't worry. That's what happens when you're broadcasting from what looks like the front cover of an Alpen cereal box. The beautiful, beautiful scenes there. Look, the Prime Minister describing that meeting with President Macron yesterday as being le bromance.
It was a really fascinating bilateral meeting between Boris Johnson and President Macron. Obviously, these are two leaders who've had big tensions, particularly if Brexit obviously has really fuelled divisions between Boris Johnson and President Macron. And they've really not actually got on pretty much the whole of the last 2 years. So yesterday we were kind of expecting more of the same, that they would clash over things. I think Boris Johnson has felt frustrated at times at having to lead the push on Ukraine and wanting France to be up there with him. But actually, yesterday, quite late on, we had a briefing from Number 10 insiders who told us actually this was the bromance, that they've reset their relationship, that they want to put everything behind them and focus on Ukraine and move forward. So I think it was quite an interesting meeting.
Really, that relationship, because in many ways they've got a lot of similarities, haven't they? Sort of charismatic individuals that have had sort of personal success but might not have a united party behind them, lots of domestic problems. You can understand why perhaps there might be some sort of kinship there. Whether or not that can be fruitful in terms of policy is another matter.
Well, this is it. And actually, although they have had these tensions over the last 2 years, they've got a lot in common at the moment. As you say, they've both got massive domestic issues to face. And there is almost an element when you get to these summits that, it's a very small band of people. It's very lonely at the top. These are the people who actually understand what it's like to be there. And actually, President Macron and Prime Minister Johnson, they're in a very similar position at the moment. So maybe there are things they can chat about and how to cope with those domestic pressures. And they almost take refuge in the international scene, don't they? They can walk tall on the world stage and look great when they're talking to the world leaders and leave those domestic pressures behind. So I think they do share quite a lot in common at the moment.
Sam, what are you hearing about Macron? I mean, now that he's got his backside kicked in the elections in France, is it true, we hear this talk that he's looking to start a mini EU club?
Yeah, well, this was interesting because there were two things that were very interesting aside from the international side of yesterday's bylaw. One was that what they didn't talk about was the small boats issue, and one was this issue about a kind of secondary EU, a parallel EU, if you will, that Macron is trying to push. Now, it's a very controversial idea. Brexiteers absolutely hate it. They see it as trying to drag Britain back into the EU by the back door. It's a kind of Macron describes it as a political community. So you have stronger ties to Brussels, even if you're not part of the EU. Now, he pushed this at the meeting yesterday. The French press here were told about this. The British press weren't told by Number 10, which obviously raised some eyebrows and makes you wonder why. The French press were told that actually Boris Johnson enthusiastically received this idea, which you can imagine wouldn't go down so well in Brexiteer circles. So we asked Number 10 why we weren't told about this. Was he enthusiastic about this? And they were completely denying it, saying actually Boris Johnson was just being polite when Macron was raising this idea. So we'll have to see.
Politics, eh? The front of the Telegraph is interesting this morning. We're just looking at pictures of President Biden there, and there's talk that Biden may well be a bit of a roadblock for Boris Johnson when he speaks later today. Boris Johnson proposing to try and tackle the cost of living crisis by encouraging people to grow more food. But this is apparently threatening American isolationism and climate commitments. Could there be a bit of a row brewing between the two North Atlantic countries?
Yeah, possibly. But what's also interesting is that actually Boris Johnson and President Biden, they're not having face-to-face, one-to-one talks. They're not having any bilateral meetings at this summit, which was surprising to us. Obviously, as great allies, the UK and the US, you would expect that. It's not happening. Now, we're told by Number 10 that it's not a snub. It's just that actually President Biden is only meeting the host nations, so Germany at this summit and then Spain at the NATO summit to follow. So we'll read of that what you may, really.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, as we've been discussing this morning with Chris Curtis, is going to be overseas. He's just been in Kigali in Rwanda. He's now in the Alps in Bavaria in Germany. Not likely to be back home for some days. And meanwhile, sort of a lot of, I don't know what you could describe it as, perhaps discussions behind the scenes about whether or not his position is tenable, and also talk about whether or not he can afford a cabinet reshuffle.
Yeah, it sounds like any plans for a reshuffle will be delayed until the autumn. But, I think reshuffles are so destabilising. Why would you do it? You've got a cabinet that's incredibly loyal to you. They could have caused trouble for Boris Johnson this week. They didn't. So why cause trouble for yourself by shuffling the pack? It doesn't really make any sense. So I don't think we'll see that imminently. I think Boris Johnson needs to keep as many people loyal as possible at the moment.
People who could potentially be vulnerable, though, if there was to be a cabinet reshuffle. George Eustice amongst those names. We've got him on the programme with us a little bit later on. Do you think he'll be sighing with relief this morning?
Well, look, nobody wants to lose those cabinet jobs, do they? He has been one of the ones who has been slightly more outspoken about the issues Boris Johnson's faced over recent weeks. But, I think there is a sense that he's got a big job to do, that he's getting on and doing it. So why would you move him at this moment? And I think I'm sure he'll be relieved to hear that no reshuffle is imminent.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.